turn to the next blank page in your journal, put today's date at the top, and put your full title, Lesson 3-7, Multiplying Decimals. We're going to start today by looking at some examples of some multiplication problems with decimals. Here's the first thing I want you to notice. Notice my decimals are not lined up necessarily like they are in addition and subtraction. What I would like for you to do is look at these example problems and see if you can determine the rule for where I put the decimal in the answer. Hit pause and write me a sentence what you think the rule is going to be. Okay, now let's look. Notice if I ignore the decimal, 31 times 2 is 62. I had one number behind the decimal in the problem, so I had to have one number behind the decimal in my answer. For the second problem, if I ignore the decimals, 74 times 3 is 222. I'm going to count how many numbers are behind the decimal. I have two numbers behind the decimal in the problem, so I'm going to have two numbers behind the decimal in my answer. On my third example, if I ignore the decimals and multiply 18 times 4, I get 72. I have two numbers behind the decimal in the problem, so I have to have two numbers behind the decimal in my answer. On the next example, if I ignored the decimals, I would have 7 times 3 is 21. I have 1, 2, 3 numbers behind the decimal in the problem, so I have to have 1, 2, 3 in my answer. Now notice I had to put this 0 for a placeholder because 7 times 3 was 21, but I know I had to have 3 numbers behind the decimal, so I had to add a 0 as that placeholder. On our last example, if I ignored the decimal, 112 times 3 gives me 336. I have one number behind the decimal in the problem, so I had to have one number behind the decimal in my answer. The most important thing for multiplication to remember is you do not have to line up decimals. Only in addition and subtraction do you have to line up the decimals. So let's do some practice problems together. Number 1 says 8.3 times 2.9. Ignore your decimals for now and multiply normally. 9 times 3 is 27. 9 times 8 is 72. 72 plus 2 is 74. I'm through with my 9, so I mark it out and add a 0. I'm also through with my 2, so I'm going to mark it out. Now I can multiply by 2. 2 times 3 is 6. 2 times 8 is 16. Now we can add. 7 plus 0 is 7. 4 plus 6 is 10. Carry the 1. I know that 6 and 1 is 7, and 7 plus 7 is 14. Carry the 1. 1 plus 1 is 2. So now I have 2,404, but I haven't looked at the decimal. I need to find the correct place for the decimal. Notice I have one number behind the decimal here, one number behind the decimal there, for a total of 2 numbers behind the decimal. So if I have 2 numbers behind the decimal in the problem, I have to have 2 numbers behind the decimal in the answer. So my correct answer is actually 24 7/100. Number 2, 3 8/10 times 2. Now we know that in the number 2, my decimal is at the end. But notice I didn't line up the decimals, and that's fine. In multiplication, I do not have to line up the decimals. So let's ignore the decimals for now and multiply. 2 times 8 is 16. Carry your 1. 2 times 3 is 6. 6 plus 1 is 7. Now I need to see how many digits are behind the decimal in the problem. I have one number behind the decimal in the problem, so I have to have one number behind the decimal in the answer. So my answer is 7 6/10. I want you to hit pause and try number 3 on your own. When you're finished, hit play again to check your work. Okay, let's check your work. You had 12 hundredths times 5 3/10. So let's ignore the decimals and multiply. 3 times 2 is 6. 3 times 1 is 3. It's not necessary, but you can multiply the 3 times the 0 if you want to get 0. I'm finished with the 3, so I mark it out and add a 0. 5 times 2 is 10, carry the 1. 5 times 1 is 5, 5 plus 1 is 6. And now let's add. 6, 3, 6. Now let's count to see how many digits are behind the decimal in the problem. 1, 2, 3. I have 3 digits behind the decimal in the problem, so I must have 1, 2, 3 behind in my answer. And if there's not a number in the ones place, I always like to add a 0 for a placeholder. If you got your answer right, give yourself a smiley face. I want you to try number 4 on your own. Again, press pause, work it in your journal, and then you may hit play again to check your work. Okay, let's check your work. You had 31 hundredths times 2 9/10. So let's multiply. 9 times 1 is 9. 9 times 3 is 27. Carry the 2. 9 times 0 is 0. 0 plus 2 is 2. I'm finished with my 9. I'm going to mark it out and add my 0. I like to mark out my 2 so I don't accidentally use it again. Now let's multiply. 2 times 1 is 2. 2 times 3 is 6. And now I'm not going to multiply the 2 times the 0 because I know it gives me 0. Now we can add. 9 plus 0 is 9. 7 plus 2 is 9. 2 plus 6 is 8. Now I need to determine where my decimal goes. So I count to see how many numbers are behind the decimal in the problem. 1, 2, 3 numbers behind the decimal in the problem. So I must have 3 decimals behind in my answer. 1, 2, 3. And again, there's not a number in the ones position, so I ought to add a 0 for a placeholder. Number 5. Cameron earns $4.60 an hour working part-time as a painter's assistant. She worked a total of 15 hours 1 week. How much did Carmen earn? Here's one thing I want you to notice. When it talks about an hour, that means 1 hour. So if she makes $4.60 for 1 hour, to find out how much money she's going to make in 15 hours, what math problem do I need to solve? That's right, $4.60 times 15 hours. So let's multiply. 5 times 0 is 0. 5 times 6 is 30. Carry your 3. 5 times 4 is 20. 20 plus 3 is 23. I'm finished with my 5, so I mark it out and add a 0. I'm going to mark out that 3 I carried. Now I'm ready to multiply again. 1 times 0 is 0. 1 times 6 is 6. 1 times 4 is 4. Now we can add. 0, 0, 9, 6. Now I need to count the number of digits behind the decimal in the problem. So notice I have 2 numbers behind the decimal in the problem. So I have to have 2 numbers behind in my answer. So my answer is 69. It is a word problem, so make sure you labeled. It wants to know how much money she earned. So she earned $69. Number 6. Susan earned $5.80 an hour working at a local video store. She worked a total of 7.5 hours on Wednesday. How much money did she earn? So I know that she made $5.80 for 1 hour. So to find out how much money she made in 7.5 hours, we're going to multiply. So $5.80 times 7.5. 5 times 0 is 0. 5 times 8 is 40. Carry the 4. 5 times 5 is 25. 25 plus 4 is 29. Mark out your 5 and add a 0. I'm going to mark out the 4 so I don't accidentally use it again. 7 times 0 is 0. 7 times 8 is 56. Carry the 5. 7 times 5 is 35. 35 plus 5 is 40. Now we can add 0, 0. 9 plus 6 is 15. Carry the 1. 2 plus 1 is 3. Bring down my 4. Now I need to determine where my decimal goes. Notice I have 1, 2, 3 numbers behind the decimal in the problem, so I need 1, 2, 3 numbers behind the answer, behind the decimal in my answer. But notice, this is a money answer, and we know that money can only go 2 places past the decimal. Money only goes to the hundredths place. I do not need that extra 0 for a placeholder in the thousandths because it is money. So my final answer is $43.50. Turn to the next blank page in your journal, divide it into 8 equal boxes, and you need to complete these 8 independent practice problems and have them ready to check at the beginning of class tomorrow.